recording, so we got it all dialed in. You're just hopping on. We're going to give it about 30 more seconds and then we'll get started.
Nice music selection, Cameron.
Thank you. Thank you. That might be the only thing I get right today is picking the music. Just kidding.
There's a little electronic music going on that's soothing,
Yeah.
but upbeat. I like it.
People that have attended many of the sessions, they're probably tired of it. So
yeah, I'm thinking about downloading it. This is good.
I'll send it your way, Tom. All right. Well, we'll get started here. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Global Entrepreneurship Week Sacramento 2021, powered by Western Health Advantage. We're excited that you're joining us for this panel discussion on the circular economy and designing with the end in mind. We are proud and excited to partner with the Western Placer Waste Management Authority, the College of SSIS, Sac State Sustainability Center, and Recyclops on this panel discussion. My name is Cameron Law, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Carlson Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, and I also serve as the Sacramento organizer for Global Entrepreneurship Week. And I'm joined by one of our team members, Arlene Miranda, who provides administrative and marketing support to the Carlson Center, and she helps us really get the word out with all these events and many of our programs. For those of you that don't know about the Carlson Center, we serve as a regional hub and platform for providing approachable and accessible entrepreneurial education, community, and support to enable startup founders of all backgrounds to explore and launch their businesses. And we're really working towards mobilizing this vision of making the greater Sacramento region a premier hub for innovation and entrepreneurship. And really how we operate, we work across a continuum that we call the entrepreneurial journey, and Global Entrepreneurship Week falls under our Discover set of programs, really building those on-ramps and creating those inspirational moments for you to take steps forward and mobilizing your ideas and getting your startups off the ground. We are actually joining a global movement today. So Global Entrepreneurship Week is indeed global. We're joining over 180 countries around the world that are celebrating this week and having similar conversations that we're having here today. And so before I hand it over to our moderator, I wanted to give a shout out to those in the Carlson Center. We have a little viewing party here, so they can give us a little there we go. We got some students in there, so we're excited to have them plug into this conversation. And I'm now going to turn it over to Sarah Vira, who's a master's in public policy and administration student at Sac State. And she's also a staff member at the Western Placer Waste Management Authority. So I will turn it on over to her to get started with the discussion, and then I'll pin our panelists.
Great. Thank you so much, Cameron, for the introduction and for hosting this panel discussion this afternoon. I'm really excited for this opportunity to moderate this important discussion about the circular economy. We definitely need collaboration from a variety of sectors to make the circular economy a reality. This includes government, policymakers, businesses, entrepreneurs, and recycling and facility operators. And luckily, we have a representation from a variety of these sectors this afternoon that I'm happy to introduce. So first, I wanted to say thank you to our speakers for taking the time out of your busy schedule as well. So I would like to first introduce Tom Kandris. He is the co-founder and CEO of Package One. Mr. Kandris is a regional business leader from Northern California and a serial entrepreneur and investor. In 2000, Mr. Kandris co-founded Package One, an innovative and agile manufacturer of corrugated packaging products, which grew from a self-funded startup to an over $60 million enterprise where he eventually led the company to a successful exit in 2017. He sits on several for-profit, nonprofit, and government boards. So Tom, if you want to give everyone a wave.
Hi, everybody.
Great. We also have with us this afternoon Nate Pelskar. He's the Senior Projects Manager at the California Product Stewardship Council. Mr. Pelskar manages CPSC's largest grant project, which is the California Drug Take Back Program, as well as dozens of other grants related to the reduction of household hazardous waste, single-use propane cylinders, and other material management issues. CPSC is a network of local governments, non-government organizations, businesses, and individuals supporting policies and projects where producers share in the responsibility for managing problem products at the end of their life. And I guess, Nate, you want to give everyone a wave there? Excellent. And next, I'm happy to introduce Eric Otto, the program manager at the Western Placer Waste Management Authority. Eric is also my boss. Eric has worked at the Western Placer Waste Management Authority, also known as the WAPMA, for over 20 years, and he's responsible for overseeing the operations of the facility's mixed waste material recovery facility, the green waste composting facility, and the sanitary landfill. The authority here is a regional agency established by a joint exercise of powers agreement between Placer County and the cities of Lincoln, Rockland, Roseville to operate and maintain the landfill and resource recovery facilities. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon. So happy to have you. Okay, so I have a couple topics lined up for the group today. I'll just pose the questions to the group and just feel free to jump in when you feel called. I wanted to start off this afternoon by unpacking this term, the circular economy. So first, I wanted to see what is your understanding of the term, the circular economy? And I guess part two is, how is the circular economy different than the current system of recycling and waste management?
All right, well, I guess I'll be bold. I'll jump in. As Sarah mentioned, we're kind of at the end of the line on the waste management side. So historically, materials have flown, have moved towards us for disposal. And over the last 20 odd years, we've worked really hard to recover products and put them back into the economic mainstream. But it's still very much a linear process from producer to consumer and then down to us. And I think from my perspective is really working to remove that linear process and making it circular, where we are working with the producers of those products and they're working with the consumers to really put more recyclable content into that stream and not have as much single-use materials, and really design from the start to where we can reuse those materials to the greatest benefit possible and reduce our reliance on virgin products wherever possible. Because we have an enormous amount of resources on our waste stream that we are literally just dumping in the ground. So, I see it as really a shift on how we treat the materials from start to finish, instead of this linear model to the circular coined model.
Yeah, I'll jump in really quick.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate being part of this conversation. I think it's important to start by recognizing really where we're at. And, circular economy is a bit of a cliche term already, because it seems to mean something a little bit different to, 10 different people. So what we say over here at CPSC, the California Product Stewardship Council, which specializes in green design and pushing forward with the circular economy and extended producer responsibility, is we say that we're currently in a cradle to grave economy, and we're shifting towards a cradle to cradle economy. So materials are harvested, products are produced, the consumers then purchase and use them, and then they're disposed. That's the cradle to grave economy. We're trying to shift through any number of policies and regulations and just general consumer behavior, a change to the cradle to cradle economy, where once products reach an end of life, essentially, it's then reused or recycled so that it can then be upcycled into a better product or a different product, or simply recycled or improved to be reused as it was originally produced.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I kind of want to add a little bit to that. I think those are great definitions, and it's a perfect segue into kind of how I built my businesses is the commercialization of some of this technology. So you can go to the cradle to cradle or kind of create the whole circular event here. But I think the commercialization piece is also an avenue to making it successful. Because some of the products that we've actually developed were really very expensive, and some of the markets we're actually trying to penetrate with some of the recyclable materials are very cost sensitive. So in addition to kind of creating the cradle to cradle and kind of moving out of the linear process, but taking these things in a circular manner, but making them commercialized as well.
And I think that's a great point, Tom, is that it really comes down to markets and money in the end, right? Is that if we can make the reuse of products more economically viable, then that's where businesses are going to start to be attracted to those products. And maybe that it jumps ahead to the policy discussion a bit, but it's really hard to crack into those markets if you can't make it economically viable for those commercial entities.
And you may have to tackle this kind of a piece at a time, because I think if you start looking at the totality of what circular economy is and the whole cradle to grave aspects of this thing, I think if you attack it in its totality, it probably is very hard to do. But also if you look at it in piece by piece with the end in mind, I think you have a lot more chance of success.
Yeah, I'd love to add something there. I was thinking about this actually yesterday, and one of the kind of examples that came to mind when I was in the discussion is the concept of Coca-Cola. My wife loves Diet Coke. I don't understand the aspartame. I can't do it, but she loves the stuff. And I think, what if Coca-Cola had a subscription? What if I got every week, I got a crate of glass Coca-Cola bottles that showed up at my doorstep? Then guess what? I wouldn't have Pepsi and Coke in my fridge right now. I would just have Coke. Where I have Diet Pepsi and I have Diet Coke in my fridge because I don't know why, but I do. But and I think about this situation where it's like, guess what? Coca-Cola wins in this situation where they are delivering me this bottle, but also next time, before they deliver the next one, I put my glass bottles back out there and their driver picks them up and takes them away. And they, are able to reuse those. And, at least the theory behind this is suddenly this product becomes a subscription, and Coca-Cola creates loyalty that they wouldn't otherwise, be able to necessarily create from a user like my wife, who frankly doesn't really care much between Diet Pepsi and Diet Coke. It's like whatever was cheaper, whatever was closer to her at the store. And so it's like, oh, I see that where suddenly the circular economy is, as an enabler for, in this hypothetical example, Coca-Cola, and they can do good in the world and good for business at the same time. And I think that is not an isolated example, that there are a lot of opportunities to, enhance business models with the circular economy.
Well, and that's a great concept. And it's, as you were talking there, Ryan, I was thinking that, and I'd love to hear what the rest of the group thinks about this, is the circular economy, to me, almost in a way steps back to a more community-based economic model, where we've moved from, over time, from a more community-based to a globalized society, which has some enormous advantages, but there almost needs to be a move back to a community-based environment here. Is your idea of, it's almost like the milkman that used to bring milk and pick up the empty milk bottles. And that works probably in a more localized market. And I'm wondering if circular economy almost kind of necessitates a little more local business and local environments, as opposed to having these big globalized outlets.
Yeah,
I think those are great examples. I would say that from my perspective, it's returning materials back to as much of its original form as possible, and try to get the reuse out of these materials. The example that I used, I think when I was talking to some folks earlier before this, is I had the first solid waste anaerobic digester in North America on my property. I was able to take 65% solids and convert it to energy. So I was able to take my manufactured waste stream and contribute it to my digester, and effectively add some hydrogen into the process and create, something that actually can create energy for my plant. But the effluent that was created, the short fiber that was created, I was able to take some of that short fiber and actually create other products from that short fiber. So, rather than say, cleaning, taking energy to clean something and to reuse it, is to repurpose the waste stream and repurpose it into energy, but also other manufacturable products, therefore not killing as many trees, but taking the effluent to create other products from it. And so, when you start looking at from a global economy standpoint, beyond what you might consider the community, I think you can start looking at very sustainable ways of empowering the global economy and creating other manufacturable ways to encourage people to do the same.
I think it's important to recognize at the beginning of the conversation too, is that without diving too deep into social issues, that we're at a bit of a crossroads when it comes to the climate. And we're now recognizing that the way we've been consuming resources is not sustainable, and that the public has an appetite, a quickly growing appetite for sustainable business and reusable materials. They're no longer interested in single-use materials as much as they used to be. They're not as focused on convenience as they used to be because of these new priorities. And in order to get to where we need to get to, requires public education and a significant amount of behavior change. And it also requires us to recognize that where we're at now from an economic perspective is, for the most part, a result in a lack of regulation to push businesses in the way that they need to go to get to where we need to be. So what happens from CPSC's perspective is we have to help the government arrive at policy solutions that basically fill in the gap. That's the missing piece that we need to impose change to get us to a more sustainable economic and environmental model. I think it's important to recognize that at the beginning of the conversation, because that's really going to help guide us through all decisions that have yet to come in regards to reuse, recycling, and so forth.
And to your point, I think policy, that's probably going to be one of the next questions that comes up, is, policy is really important because a lot of the materials that, we feel that we can reclaim are actually coming from the landfill. And so creating policy that will allow not just diversion, but, creating and taking products in the landfill and creating opportunities for taking that part of the waste stream and repurposing it. And policy is going to play a big role in that, because diversion is highly rewarded, but reclaiming some of it is not.
And I think, to your point, policy is going to drive the economics, right? If producers are required to use a certain amount of recovered product as a policy, then that's going to maybe offset some of that otherwise economic down pressure of selecting a product that may be marginally more expensive or marginally lower in quality. But at the end of the day, we have to figure out how to bring those up to parity so that there is not the incentive to use virgin products.
Absolutely. These are all excellent points. I wanted to quickly summarize some of the trends that I'm hearing about the circular economy phrase. I'm hearing changes, big and small. Of course, big changes systems-wise, thinking, seeing waste differently, and designing waste out of the system. I've also heard some comments about local changes, so the local element of the circular economy. Also the need for policy and the need for markets as well. I want to touch on both of those topics, both markets and policy, but before we do, I wanted to, we didn't get a chance to introduce our other panelist, Ryan Smith, at the beginning, so I wanted to just acknowledge that Ryan Smith is also joining us here. Ryan Smith is the founder and CEO of Recyclops, and it's a technology startup that innovates solutions for sustainability. This company started in 2014, and it became the first to apply technology to environmental logistics to expand recycling services that previously didn't exist. So I wanted to also welcome Ryan to our conversation. So next, perhaps let's move, we touched on markets a little bit. I wanted to discuss I guess, discuss the importance of recycling markets and how they impact the circular economy. I'll provide a little bit of background for folks that may not be as into the recycling world as the five of us are here, but we've had a major challenge thrown at us the last couple of years in regards to recycling markets. So for many years, China was a main destination for material collection in North America and Europe. We collected material here, processed it, baled it up, sent it across in China to be remanufactured into new products. However, in 2017, China enacted their national sword policy, which really restricted their ability to import recyclable materials. So in effect, this really destabilized the recycling markets. So I wanted to ask the group, the role of what has been the impact of recycling markets on the circular economy, or I guess the lack of markets, that is.
I'll say something.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that's been so fascinating for me that has really, at least in my mind, come to light because of this is kind of this breakdown in why different parties recycle. So if you look at why an individual household or an individual recycles, they're recycling because it's the right thing to do. They're recycling because they care about the environment. They're recycling because of kind of this altruistic or this this view on the world that like, hey, they think that they can make an impact for good in the world, and this is a small thing they can do. You look at why recycling was happening, on the other side, or how recycling was happening, and it was, it's a commodity business where you make money by selling commodities, and the disconnect there for me is really insightful because, when a business says to, or a city says to a consumer, oh, we can't recycle anymore because we don't make enough money from the material, the consumer is like, we should still recycle. It's still the right thing to do. And the business is like, what am I supposed to do? And I think it's created this shift where, there's a need to rely on kind of more stable revenue. I know in our business, we were very reliant on commodity revenue. And we shifted to say, no, we need to be reliant on service revenue as a business. We need to make sure that this business can sustain the ups and downs of commodities. And that because it doesn't matter if plastic prices are really low, recycling plastic is still important. And it doesn't matter if they're really high, recycling plastic is still important. And we want to make sure that, and I think that it's important that, there's intervention that helps make sure that recycling, because recycling is the right thing to do, that there's incentives to do it no matter the economic kind of changes. And we've seen that there's consumers are willing to pay that. Like we're a subscription-based recycling service that people are paying for, and it's sustainable, independent of low recycling markets that we've seen in the last few years.
And I approach this from operating a business, and kind of to your point, one of the drivers, not the driver, but one of the drivers for me agreeing to build this digester on my property was paper products. It cost me money to recycle. When paper dropped below $25 a ton, I was paying people $75 to $150 a ton to basically haul it away from my property. And so it became cheaper for me to turn it into energy. And then when commodity prices jumped up, then I could actually divert more to the recycling program. So there is an economic component to it. So when commodity pricing dropped to the point where, I had to pay to have my waste stream hauled away versus converting it to energy and saving on my electric bill. And then when prices jumped to the roof, I could easily sell it and put other things in the waste stream to create energy. So I think the economic drivers cannot be ignored. I think we can all agree that, if the air is a little cleaner and the water is a little easier to drink, that it's a good thing to do, but economics still drive the engine. So there either has to be incentives. And I think the carrot and the stick approach, I really believe in the carrot approach. I think beating businesses or consumers to quote unquote, do the right thing. I think incentives, work better. I think incentives work better for business. And I think it kind of creates opportunity.
And I tend to agree, Tom. I get Ryan's point, and on a personal level, I totally
Oh,
agree.
for sure. Yeah, for
Recycling,
sure.
you need to do that. It's the right thing to do in the long run. I think, on the from a municipal side, is it's really tough to convince, the residents and businesses within elected officials' sphere of influence that it makes sense to spend more money that they may not have to spend in the first place, but more money on something that is not generating revenue or is going to result in some kind of loss. I think we need to figure out how do we improve that economic model. And the fact that, that the overseas markets have in effect collapsed is right now it's putting downward pressure on recycling. But what it really means to me is that there's an opportunity. There's an opportunity to bring some of those recycling systems back here locally and reduce some of the in-between costs of transport and brokers and everything else. And instead of having markets halfway across the world, we've got them right next door. And maybe that helps improve that economic picture so we can get to the point where we're able to recycle more and we know that we're doing the right thing, but we're also able to do it in a economically viable manner.
Yeah,
For sure.
I've got so much to add to this question. I could probably talk for an hour on this one question alone. I like how you keyed up the question by giving a little bit of background about National Sword, because that really was a shocking moment for the waste handling industry in the US. We came to the realization that we didn't have the infrastructure that we needed to properly recycle and reuse products. We used to have a fairly developed system. And then over time, it became clear that it was cheaper to ship these things overseas. We're not quite sure what they did with those things. Now we seem to understand better what they used to do with them. But then they made that massive policy change in 2017. And those that handle material waste in the US came to the realization they don't have a lot of places to take their stuff. So what you had was a public that had been educated on the importance of recycling and the importance of putting certain products into the waste bin. But then once they arrived at the waste facility, and Eric can probably back me up on this, they had nothing to do with them. So they would collect all these number 2s or number 7s or number 6s. If the market doesn't exist, then they would simply palletize them and put them into the dump in many instances. I'm not saying everyone did this, but because the market structure didn't exist to effectively distribute goods and services, in this case, waste products, they essentially went into the dump. So what we're seeing now, after the US waste industry had a chance to kind of pull itself back together and do a bit of an assessment, they're identifying where those gaps exist in the system and they're rebuilding them. So we're now finding more and more facilities that take certain types of plastic. We're now finding jurisdictions in states like California that are creating both incentive systems and disincentive systems to ensure that these products are more likely to be recycled and reused. So, National Sword was really a true national wake-up moment. And California, I'm happy to say, is a leader in many fronts related to waste and is really putting forward over the last couple of sessions a number of bills, many of which my organization has sponsored and pushed forward with, that force the producers to not only think more green when they're producing products, make them more reusable, more recyclable, but on the back end is creating markets so that we can ensure that once the product reaches its end of life, that it's recycled or reused, which then takes us back to the circular economy. So to kind of put a bow on it, National Sword helped us realize what was wrong. We're now putting into place the pieces that we're missing. And that, at this point, is allowing us to create a system that's more circular.
You can categorize these by industry. I think plaster probably does a really good job, but being able to sort the material as it comes in for its intended next purpose, so if you can sort the plastic or you can sort the wood fiber, and I'm investing in companies now that you can actually put microbes on the waste stream to reduce it into reduce the pathogens and reduce it into some sort of compostable product, or even if you have to combust it, it's got a higher energy coefficient. So I think sorting it. So we're really talking about what happens to the material once it goes to the end of the waste stream. You know, we haven't really touched much upon the, you know, designing the recyclability into the product, you know, before it gets to the waste stream. But, you know, sorting things and putting them in categories for intended repurpose, I think is a really good, a good start. And I know that, you know, like Placer and a number of other, waste recycling centers have done a pretty good job trying to do that.
Absolutely. So we have this major challenge with the lack of overseas markets, but another way to phrase that is, you know, an opportunity, as Eric mentioned, to perhaps move some of the markets closer, localize some of these markets. My next question for the group here is, with these constraints, perhaps what type of opportunities do we have to bring some of these businesses or entrepreneurial activities, or I guess what steps we need to take to start closing this loop, because the option that we had is no longer available.
Well, with change comes opportunity. I don't think there's ever been a greater opportunity for small businesses to take advantage of a massive swing or behavioral change in our economy. Since National Sword went into effect, we saw in California the collapse of a number of recycling centers. But what the state is now doing, and what a number of smaller jurisdictions are doing, they're implementing ordinances, and the state, of course, is implementing statewide laws that provide financial structural supports to ensure that they're profitable. So what I think we'll start seeing are a number of small recycling facilities popping up where none currently exist. We've got recycling wastelands where you can go for hours and not have access to a recycling facility. If I wanted to take back my soda bottles, if I wanted to, recycle any kind of plastic, in some cases, it's not easy to do. So I think what we're seeing now is just a tremendous opportunity for small businesses, much like Tom. It sounds like he's a serial entrepreneur, and he sees these changes as opportunities to or product that meets a gap, that fills a gap.
In my mind, that's the key right there, is finding these entities, much like Tom, that are entrepreneurial spirits that are looking at figuring out something just a little bit different. Him and Ryan, that instead of saying, okay, I took this bottle back, I'm going to clean it up and refill it again and sell it to you in its same form. That's great where it can be done. But there's so many other opportunities, whether it's generating energy and getting the effluent from that to produce new fibers, like Tom was mentioning, or, there's so many new opportunities that maybe have not been developed, but now we can encourage their development and foster their development, and realize that we're able to manage these resources and stop looking at them as wastes, and instead look at them as resources that we're mining for products that we've maybe never really thought about before or explored before. So it really is a golden opportunity to be a little more self-sustainable with our materials.
Well, there's some environmental benefits as well. You start looking at California fires, right? And there might be some excess fuel, that's generated from the lack of deforestation or cleaning up the fuel, but some of that material can be repurposed into, very viable products. And so I think there's environmental enhancements that we can do to work with government to, clean up and use these long and short fibers into new products. But one of the categories that I've seen is really kind of lacking is really in the manufacturability of some of these repurposed materials. And so it might require some different tooling, some different expertise, some different equipment to get it to a ready form. And when I start looking around for ways to repurpose the waste streams that I took advantage of, I think there's a lack of equipment to convert it into another form of product that can be reused.
And I think that speaks to a bit of relationships and communication amongst the users of these products. I have had very few communications with the end users of our products, but if they were, co-located or right next to us and could walk across the street and say, these are the specs that I'm looking for on these products, let's work together to get to that point, because that's going to make them, more readily recyclable in my system, then that's going to help foster, getting to where we want to go. You look at where we've come from, where, we bail up a ton of plastic, you put it on a truck, you haul it out to a port, you put it on a ship, you take it halfway across the world. What's the greenhouse gas impact of that? It's enormous. And we never talk with the folks that are over in China that are taking those plastics to create something new. So, have someone here local that we can work with and converse with and, find out what they need, because then we can produce what they need.
Absolutely. Those are great points. And
Let's follow up on that, Eric. I sold my business in 2017, but there's another business that I have in mind for you. Let's follow up on that.
All right. I love it.
Great. Yeah, we should get you guys to talk. Yes, those are excellent comments. I see the conversation shifting a little bit towards the design element of this challenge. So I do want to touch on that, absolutely. But before we go there, we've also mentioned policy, and as a public administration and policy student, I do definitely want to have a quick conversation about policy. So where do you see policy and regulation fitting in with this movement towards a circular economy?
I can take that one first. So one of the major things that we do at my organization is advocate for change along the stewardship spectrum, which goes all the way from product stewardship, where producers essentially charge fees, for an example, like carpet, the consumer will pay a fee, and then that fee will go towards the recycling of the product at the end of life, all the way to extended producer responsibility, which is where the producer actually takes back all the materials and properly disposes of them or reuses them, refurbishes them, recycles them, whatnot. So what we've learned over the years, and we've been in existence for well over a decade, is it's best to go product by product unless you're able to somehow provide a governmental agency with the authority it needs for basically overall authority to identify problem products and then come up with a solution that's somewhere on that stewardship spectrum. So what we've had the most success with is, for example, pharmaceuticals and sharps. In 2018, my organization passed a law that requires pharmaceutical companies to take back all of the unwanted medications that are floating about within consumers' homes. So if I go in the cupboard and see that I have an antibiotic that I didn't use, or leftover Vicodin from a tooth surgery, I could take those to a med bin that the producers paid for and had installed and serviced on a regular basis and drop them off there. I know for a fact that those meds are not going to fall into the wrong hands, that they're not going to be dumped into the toilet and flushed, which is one of the most ecologically wrong ways to dispose of unwanted medications. So we advocate for change that forces the producers to take responsibility for these products. So that's one way of dealing with problem products. Another way is through legislation or through a series of incentive regulations or disincentive regulations, get the producers to design a product that's more green. Consumer behavior is now demanding that producers produce products that are more environmentally sensitive, that are more green, right? I think we can all agree with that. But what we're seeing now is the need for so much change in the way products are produced and designed and created and put onto the market, that producers aren't doing it fast enough because there's no profit motive. So we're seeing governments stepping up to the plate with the support of organizations like mine and forcing legislative change that will get us to the environmental finish line faster, right? So we're in the middle of significant climate change. We need to get to a point where we're more sustainable. Creating a system of incentives isn't going to get us to where we need to be fast enough. So it's important for the government to recognize that situation, that the profit motive isn't enough for businesses to make changes quickly in most instances, and that additional support from the government's needed.
Absolutely.
And I expose myself here a little bit because I'm not current on the current Cal recycle policies. But I know one of the things that I was fighting prior was the fact that they rewarded diversion and not reclaiming materials. And there was like 9 words in the legislation that could change the requirements that would reward reclaiming materials rather than diverting materials. So I know we applied for a number of grants, and there's a number of businesses right behind me who are applying for opportunities that could take materials from the waste stream, but the rewards only came to people that were diverting. So hopefully that's changed. There's like 9 words in that policy that would fix that problem.
That's interesting. Yeah, devils in the details for sure. But I liked Nate's perspective there, going material by material. Although there is the circular economy, right, which is this big picture, large scale change, and then in actuality, going at it step by step. There may or may not be administrative functions and the people infrastructure of government in place to administer a large scale circular economy type program at the moment. Does anyone else have another comment on this?
I had a question. Just Nate, I'm sorry. Nate had brought up that a single product, and one of the questions I have, and it can be to Nate, to the whole group, how are you dealing with packaging? Because I know the focus is on the single-use packaging, and I'm looking at how the legislation is being passed. And it's always that chicken and egg, and packaging is so complex, and working with the manufacturers, how is there any coordination on looking at how to approach this for all packaging as an example? Because that's not just one item, and paper, plastic, like the whole thing when you look at a product and what it's packaged in. And it's not to put anybody on the spot, but what's going on? How is that getting tackled? Because I'm just seeing that it is going kind of piece by piece, and I don't see packaging being attacked holistically.
Yeah, I'll be happy to take the first stab at that. So there are a number of legislative solutions that have been proposed over the last couple of years specific to packaging. In fact, there are some being pushed forward now by Senator Ben Allen and his team to address packaging. So, we always start with the holistic approach, and this is in the planning phase before you even introduce a bill. As you take a look at what the problem is, and you try to identify where the biggest potential for improvement exists. And then you take a look at where the opposition will be. And what you end up with is a less than ideal situation where you can force big substantive change. So the goal is to make the biggest splash you possibly can, make the biggest improvement you can. But the nature of democracy and the nature of compromise doesn't easily allow for big major changes, especially in a highly political and contentious political environment like we have now. Even in California, we've got a quote unquote supermajority where the Dems hold supermajorities. In the House and Senate, we've got a Democrat governor. Many would argue that most of them are mods, or even some would say conservative Democrats. So very business-centric Dems, where they focus more on the costs and the sacrifices that the businesses would have to make, as opposed to what would benefit our community, what would benefit our state as a whole. So what the policymakers have determined is that it's best to go with what they know is winnable, as opposed to what would make the biggest change. Because if you go oftentimes with the bill that makes the biggest change, you'll find the greatest number of opponents and the greatest number of money stacked up against you. So it's very important to be pragmatic when coming up with solutions that will take us closer to the ultimate circular economy. And that's why you've seen approaches in the past be much more limited in scope, much more focused on products.
So
I used to own a number of packaging companies, and the package one was a small piece of that. And the corrugators that we owned, the combined business were about 400 million, making us about the second largest independent in Northern California. And some of the innovation that we looked at was, first and foremost, is design packaging out of the product. And so how do we simplify the packaging and reduce the amount of packaging? And frankly, when we did that for our clients, we actually made more money. So we actually improved our margin by eliminating packaging in the process. An innovation, I think, is with policy, we were spending a lot of energy developing alternative wax materials, biodegradable wax. because, vegetable, basically produce packaging goes in the landfill. And because there's so much wax that you can't remove it from the fiber, it's not recyclable. So if you start looking at, biodegradable wax, for example, would be a significant improvement on landfill. I look at Eric kind of nodding his head. So if you got all these grower boxes in there that just can't be repurposed because you can't separate the wax from the fiber. And so looking at, whether it's tallow, different versions of tallow, and you look at other types of oils coming in from other parts of the country that you can actually make these biodegradable wax. I mean, that would be something that the state of California, if they threw a little bit of resources out of it, probably could come up with something that would make it a recyclable product. So you start looking at that level of innovation. So look at innovation rather than say, I think policy and innovation, but policy supporting innovation.
And I think that's a great point, Tom, is, that particular example is if you made that change, if you could make that change and foster that change, now maybe we don't necessarily recycle it back as a fiber product, but it would certainly allow for the composting or digestion of that product. Whereas, if it's just a wax-based product, we may not be able to do that. And it does end up in the landfill. So, maybe what could be modestly simple changes could result in pretty significant changes, outcomes on the waste side. But again, it's having that conversation upstream instead of, this linear model where, things are generated for the least cost to transport, whatever it is, and we'll just worry about it at the end when it shows up at the dump.
And some of that wax alternative turns into biofuel. And, if you gasify it or burn it, it creates more energy than traditional. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here. But again, it becomes expensive. But I think the innovation comes from, looking at these alternatives and maybe creating fundable projects to make it interesting for businesses to explore.
Those are excellent points. We have some great questions in the chat, so I wanted to switch over and ask some of those. So first up, we have a question from Calvin. What advice do you have for startup groups with circular economic ideas and need funding to start? And I guess I'll pair this question with another question from Dr. Gravenberg. And he asked, how can a community-driven circular economy be profitable for emerging entrepreneurs?
I would say apply for grants. And I would say it 10 times, each time louder than the previous. The government provides significant grant opportunities to foster entrepreneurial innovation. CalRecycle is a perfect example. If you take a look at the grant page, they've got numerous very well-funded grant opportunities to support entrepreneurs and to come up with innovative solutions. So they're not just writing regulations to make business more difficult, but they're actually fostering growth and innovation and trying to create incentives for businesses to make change where there is no profit incentive.
There's some pretty deep pockets with the DOE and the U.S. Forestry Department, but you need to partner with your local policymakers and that also have leverage into the federal government. I think there's some real opportunity and there's some pretty deep pockets. I think if you have something that is scalable and has an appeal to the global economy, I think you probably get some traction there.
Yeah, I think those are great suggestions. And, I'd add another piece to that. And it's really what Cameron and I have been working on collaboratively is we're working to try and foster an environment here where an entrepreneur can show up with the technology, and we have the resources, we had the land, we had the infrastructure, we had the waste materials that they could use to develop a new product and give them that platform to test out their technology, test out the viability of their system and how scalable it is. So take some of those barriers out of the equation, and it really is a matter of communicating with the folks that have some of the resources and have some of the knowledge, the expertise. And that's where, I bring in Cameron on this one of, he's got a lot of the connections and I've got a lot of the infrastructure and the land. And then it's really bringing in that next component of someone who's got the idea. And it's a matter of making those relationships and having the dialogue to see what you can pull off. And maybe it doesn't happen all the time, but at least getting that conversation going, I think is going to move things in the right direction.
Yeah, having somebody like you guys in Placer, Eric, I think is extremely valuable, not only to the community, but it's great that you're suggesting that.
To answer Dr. Gravenberg's question about how can a community-driven circular economy be profitable for emerging entrepreneurs, I would say the point we made earlier about finding the gap, right? What product doesn't exist that the community wants? What service doesn't exist that the community wants that maybe is being done or offered in a more ecologically sensitive manner, and then providing that product or service. And then the mention about origin materials rather. Laura Good shared a comment about origin materials. So that's fascinating because that is a company based in West Sacramento that saw the growing need for silverware, essentially disposable silverware, that's made in a more ecologically sound manner. And silverware, plasticware, for lack of a better term, that can be reused or recycled more effectively. So it's not intended to be a single-use product like much of the plasticware that you've been using for decades has been. It's designed to be reused or recycled. Fascinating stuff. And they just went public, I believe.
I would emphasize on a lot of these that there is, I've seen with, building a business that's really focused on circular economies we bring recycling programs to communities that historically haven't had them. And we're in 180 or so communities across the country, and it's very community driven. And we have gotten very little grant money to fund it, but we found that there are people there's a willingness to pay. That the programs are able to be funded by people who care in the community, and that those people exist in every community, small and large, in the country. And so really, we really looked at that kind of, lean startup methodology and looking and validating that was there. And we got some early grant money that, both from universities and then from a state level, that really helped us to kickstart it. But we had some of that early traction that showed like, hey, there's something here. And then we leveraged that early traction to get the grants that could help us kind of take it to the next level. And then from there, we didn't need the grants to continue further, but they sure helped. But I don't think we could have gotten them without some of that early traction.
Yeah, so I think if you've got a great idea, I think there's a lot of investment dollars on the sidelines that want to fund great ideas. And I might get this wrong, but construction is probably one of the largest market opportunities for recyclables. And so the advent of tiny homes or low-income housing. And so I think there's going to be a great opportunity in the construction space if you can come up with alternative materials or ways of applying some of those materials and technology into the construction market, besides consumer goods.
Amen.
We're getting close to the end of our time here. This has been an excellent discussion. I wanted to ask for our panelists here if they could summarize maybe in a short couple of sentences. I know it's probably gonna be difficult, but I think you can do it. What does designing with the end in mind mean to you? I see Ryan.
Thinking.
Thinking, yes.
Well, I guess, I'll start is maybe we need to stop thinking about the end. I mean, that's, again, it kind of really sets up this linear model concept that there's a beginning and an end to a product. And there really shouldn't be. That, it's how much can we regenerate and reuse this product? And even at the end, when we've reused as many times as we can, there's still some latent energy to be harvested. So maybe the concept of designing for the end is not the right nomenclature to begin with.
Well said.
That's a great point, designing for the beginning.
Start from the middle, whatever low-hanging fruits there. I mean, find something that, that people want, as Ryan and Nate have said, find something, find that white space where nobody else is. find an economical way of actually producing it and delivering it to the market. Where there's no subsidies, you've got to just make it compete, with whatever's available now. And we've done this, year over year, and participate in every university egg drop, in Santa Barbara, wherever it might be. And, we give them an environmentally friendly product and a normal product. And they say, well, we like the environmentally friendly product, but it's 15% more. We'll take the other one. And so I think it's a matter of coming up with something that people want and are willing to pay for, and you got to close the manufacturing gap so it becomes, a reasonable alternative.
And I would just say, if you're focused on designing with the end in mind, recognize that the end is simply a new beginning, which again sounds kind of cliche, but the focus really is on getting us over that finish line, getting us to a circular economy where things can be reused or recycled or upcycled, and there really is no end.
I think a big piece of designing with the end in mind, I mean, it beyond what everyone has said here is really communicating about that. I think that people enjoy that quality. People like quality, and I think communicating that, hey, this is quality. There's a reason. We've done. There's a reason behind why this is a better solution than the alternative. And like almost on the marketing side, that like I almost look at like it's more than just designing. It's how are we going to design this with the end in mind, and then how are we going to communicate about that? Because that communication piece can make or break the kind of viability of some of these things. And think about how many things were great ideas that they didn't make it because they couldn't get the messaging right. And I think that's part of this designing with the end in mind, or designing to remove the end. That is a part of that how are we going to communicate about this, this to our consumers?
Absolutely. And as was touched on a little bit before, there is a cultural shift occurring as well. It seems like consumers are very interested in sustainable products made, with reuse or recycled content. Is very, very important. That exists now as a force. Are there any other, thoughts from our panelists before we close out this afternoon?
A great discussion. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity, and it's great to talk to these other folks and get to talk about a really important subject matter.
There's a lot to unpack. It's just the beginning.
I agree. I think this could go on a lot longer for sure. I appreciate the high level, but for sure it can be distilled down very, very quickly.
Well, maybe I will hop in here and draw us to a close. I want to give a special thank you to Sarah for moderating the discussion and guiding this terrific conversation. Learned a ton, and I didn't know that my designing with the end in mind would be so thought-provoking in terms of leading a conversation. So I appreciate all the thoughts that were shared. Thank you, Tom, Nate, Eric, and Ryan for serving on the panel and sharing your experience and expertise around the circular economy. And I hope this is the first of many conversations going forward, and appreciate all the partnerships that took place to make this happen. So thank you, Western Placer Waste Management Authority and the Sustainability Center here at Sac State, Recyclops, and the College of SSIS. So thank you all, and special again, thank you, Sarah, for moderating and helping with the conversation. So we hope to see you at future events. So we have 3 more for Global Entrepreneurship Week here today, and then we have a packed day tomorrow and Friday. So thank you all for joining, and thank you for sharing your experience and expertise, and have a great rest of your day. All righty.
Hi, thank you, everyone.